The line between genius and criminal is often razor thin. Throughout history, there have been individuals so cunning, so audacious, that their schemes left the world in awe and devastation. They weren't just fraudsters. They were architects of deception, spinning intricate webs of lies that ensnared governments, corporations, and everyday people alike. How did they rise to such heights of infamy? What drove them to risk everything for fortune and power? And how, ultimately, did their carefully constructed empires of deceit come crashing down? These are the stories of the most notorious fraudsters in history, where ambition met betrayal and the truth unraveled in ways no one could have foreseen. Let's talk about Frank Abagnale, the great pretender. In a world where trust is the foundation of society, one man turned deception into an art form. He was a master of disguise, a phantom in the night, and his story would become a legend. This is the tale of Frank Abagnale, the most daring con artist the world had ever seen. It started as an ordinary day in an ordinary house in Bronxville, New York. A young Frank Abagnale was like any other teenager, wild, rebellious, and disillusioned with the world around him. His parents' divorce shattered the sense of stability he once had, leaving him feeling abandoned and bitter. But little did the world know, this pain would be the catalyst for an extraordinary transformation. At the age of 16, Frank began experimenting with small crimes, stealing from his parents' wallets, forging checks with his father's signature. He quickly realized how easy it was to manipulate the system, to slip through the cracks. And that was just the beginning. His first big break came when he forged his first check, just a small amount to test the waters. The excitement he felt as he walked away with the money ignited something inside him. Frank Abagnale was no longer just a boy. He had found his calling. By 17, Frank was already a fugitive, moving from state to state, cashing forged checks to fund his lifestyle. But he didn't stop there. His thirst for adventure and his love for the thrill of deception pushed him further into dangerous territory. He realized that he didn't just want to steal money, he wanted to become someone else entirely. He didn't just want to be Frank Abagnale, he wanted to be anyone but himself. Frank's first impersonation was of a Pan Am pilot. It was a genius move. He didn't need to fly planes, he just needed the uniform. With a forged pilot's license and a fake ID, Frank slipped into the role with ease. He boarded flights without ever stepping foot in a cockpit, his charming demeanor fooling everyone from airport security to flight attendants. He was living the high life, free flights, lavish hotels, and a sense of power that came with the authority of a pilot. It was almost too easy. But as Frank became more ambitious, he knew he had to go further. He needed to think bigger. So he did something no one had ever dared to do. He posed as a doctor, a pediatrician to be exact. In a daring move, Frank landed a job at a hospital in Georgia, where he pretended to be a highly qualified medical professional. His charm and confidence were enough to convince the hospital staff and patients alike. For months, Frank moved through the hospital, performing fake procedures and consultations, all while hiding in plain sight. His ability to slip into various identities was astounding. Frank was a master of deception. In total, he impersonated a pilot, a doctor, and even a lawyer, all while committing check fraud on the side. The authorities were baffled. No one could track him down. He was always one step ahead, a shadow moving through the cracks of the system. As the manhunt grew, Frank's ability to outsmart the FBI became a game. He used fake IDs, forged documents, and his own quick wit to evade capture. But all good things must come to an end. In 1969, after evading capture for years, Frank was finally apprehended in France. The authorities had closed in on him, but Frank, ever the clever con man, was ready. He managed to escape from one prison, only to be caught again. This time he was sent to a French prison, awaiting extradition back to the U.S. Frank's story was far from over. He had been caught, but he still had a card to play. During his time in prison, Frank struck a deal with the FBI. If he helped them catch other criminals and shared his knowledge of fraud, he would be granted a lighter sentence. Frank agreed and became a consultant for the FBI, teaching them how to catch fraudsters like himself. The man who had once evaded capture at every turn was now working alongside law enforcement to outsmart others. But the true twist of Frank Abagnale's story lies in the fact that, after serving just 5 years, he was released from prison. And that was just the beginning of his second act. Frank went on to write books, give lectures, and even consult for major corporations. His name became synonymous with the idea of redemption. He was no longer the criminal mastermind who had duped the world. He was now a hero, a former con artist turned consultant. The story of Frank Abagnale is one of transformation, of a boy who grew up in a broken home and became a world-renowned expert in the very crimes he once committed. His life was a thrilling ride of deception, and his legacy lives on today, reminding us that sometimes even the most notorious fraudsters can find redemption. Let's talk about Elizabeth Holmes, the billion-dollar fraud. In the world of Silicon Valley, where innovation is king, one woman rose to the top only to crumble under the weight of her lies. This is the story of Elizabeth Holmes, an ambitious entrepreneur whose vision of revolutionizing healthcare turned into one of the most stunning frauds in history. It was the early 2000s, and Silicon Valley was buzzing with excitement. Startups were the talk of the town, and anyone with a big idea could change the world. Among them was a young woman named Elizabeth Holmes. With her trademark black turtleneck and a voice that commanded attention, she was determined to become the next Steve Jobs. Her idea was simple yet ambitious: to revolutionize blood testing with a device that could perform hundreds of medical tests from just a drop of blood. Holmes dropped out of Stanford at the age of 19 to pursue her dream. She founded Theranos, a company that promised to make healthcare cheaper, faster, and more accessible. The idea seemed like something out of a science fiction novel. Imagine being able to get all your medical test results from a single drop of blood, with results delivered in minutes, not days. Investors and media outlets were captivated by her vision. The problem was, it was all a lie. Theranos claimed that their proprietary technology, an advanced machine that could process blood tests using just a small sample, was working. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart. The technology didn't work. The machine was unreliable, giving inaccurate results that could potentially put people's lives at risk. Yet, instead of addressing the issues, Elizabeth chose to cover them up. She manipulated data, lied to investors, and misled doctors and patients. The pressure to keep up the facade was immense, but Elizabeth wasn't about to let her dream die. She was a master manipulator, able to charm the most prominent investors and board members. She convinced them that her product was on the verge of revolutionizing the medical industry. Some of the most respected names in healthcare and business bought into her vision, pouring millions into the company. Elizabeth even convinced major pharmaceutical companies and hospitals to adopt Theranos technology, all while knowing it didn't work. As the years went on, more and more red flags began to surface. Employees at Theranos were told not to speak to the media. Those who raised concerns about the device's accuracy were silenced or pushed out. Doctors and patients were kept in the dark about the flaws in the testing process. Elizabeth's charisma and her refusal to acknowledge any shortcomings of the company made it nearly impossible for anyone to question her. But as with any grand lie, the truth eventually comes out. In 2015, investigative journalist John Carreyrou of the Wall Street Journal began digging into the company's practices. What he uncovered would send shockwaves through the world of healthcare and finance. Carrie Rowe's reporting revealed that Theranos had been falsifying test results for years, putting countless patients at risk. The device that Elizabeth had promised would change the world was nothing more than a high-tech illusion. The story unraveled quickly. Elizabeth Holmes and her former partner, Ramesh Sunny Balwani, were charged with criminal fraud. Theranos was forced to shut down, and the company's investors lost billions. In 2021, Elizabeth Holmes stood trial, facing charges that could send her to prison for decades. The woman who had once been hailed as a visionary was now a symbol of corporate deception and greed. As her trial continued, the world watched in disbelief as Elizabeth Holmes, the woman who had built an empire on lies, faced the consequences of her actions. The fallout from the Theranos scandal would reshape the way the world viewed Silicon Valley and its obsession with billion-dollar startups. Let's talk about Bernie Madoff, the man who stole billions. In the world of finance, where wealth is built on trust, one man turned that trust into his personal fortune. Bernie Madoff was a legend, a man with the power to persuade, to deceive, and to make billions disappear. This is the story of how Bernie Madoff became the mastermind behind the largest Ponzi scheme in history. Bernie Madoff was a man who commanded respect. He was well known on Wall Street, a self-made billionaire who had built his fortune through his investment firm, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. To the outside world, Bernie Madoff was a symbol of success. Smart, calculating, and deeply embedded in the fabric of the financial elite. His reputation was impeccable, and investors flocked to him, eager to secure their futures. But behind closed doors, Madoff was orchestrating a scheme that would become one of the most infamous frauds in history. It started innocently enough, or so it seemed. Madoff promised his clients incredible returns that were consistently high, year after year. He offered them a sense of security, a guarantee that their money would grow steadily. But in reality, Madoff wasn't investing their money at all. Instead, he was using the funds from new investors to pay out returns to the old ones. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, a house of cards that seemed too solid to collapse. For years, Madoff's scheme went undetected. His clients trusted him implicitly, and his firm had the aura of legitimacy. He was a respected figure in the industry, a former chairman of the NASDAQ, and a philanthropist who donated large sums to charity. Madoff's network of influence was vast, and he used it to further his deception. As the scheme grew, so did his wealth. Madoff was living a life of luxury, while his clients had no idea that their money was slowly disappearing into the void. But as with all Ponzi schemes, the cracks eventually began to show. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit, and many of Madoff's clients began to ask for their money back. The scheme could no longer sustain itself. In December of that year, Bernie Madoff was arrested for securities fraud. The scale of his deception was staggering, estimated to be around $65 billion, though some experts believe it was much higher. Madoff's arrest sent shockwaves through the financial world. His clients, celebrities, charities, and ordinary people, were devastated. Many lost their life savings, while others faced financial ruin. The fallout from Madoff's fraud was far-reaching, affecting thousands of people across the globe. In 2009, Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in prison for his role in the Ponzi scheme. His story became a cautionary tale, a symbol of the dangers of unchecked trust in financial markets. The Madoff scandal exposed the vulnerabilities of the system and led to major reforms in securities regulation. For Bernie Madoff, the fraud was over, but the damage he caused would last for generations. Let's talk about Anna Sorokin, the fake heiress who fooled New York's elite. She walked among the rich and powerful, a mysterious young woman with a charm that could fool anyone. Her name was Anna Sorokin, but she would soon become infamous for a different reason. With a carefully constructed persona, she would rise to the heights of New York's elite, only to bring it all crashing down in one of the most audacious scams ever witnessed in the city's history. It all began in 2013 when a young Russian woman named Anna Sorokin arrived in New York City, determined to conquer the world. Claiming to be a wealthy socialite with a trust fund, she quickly ingratiated herself with the city's most prominent figures. Anna was charming, confident, and always dressed impeccably. She knew how to blend in seamlessly with the ultra-rich, yet there was something about her, something that seemed just a little off. Anna's story was one of mystery. She told people she was Anna Delvey, the heiress to a vast fortune in Russia, a name known in the European elite circles. To those around her, Anna appeared to be just another wealthy young woman looking to make a name for herself in the exclusive world of New York's high society. She rented expensive apartments, frequented luxury hotels, and dined in the finest restaurants. Yet, while Anna's social presence grew, the one thing that no one seemed to question was where her wealth came from, or how she afforded such a lavish lifestyle. She wasn't just participating in society's high-end events, she was becoming a star. She frequented fashion shows, rubbed elbows with celebrities, and even convinced some of the city's most influential figures that she was working on a multi-million-dollar art foundation project, one that would serve as a platform for young artists to showcase their work. She made grandiose promises, offering visions of an exclusive artsy utopia, and those around her took the bait. But Anna's true crime lay beneath the surface. What most didn't know was that Anna wasn't a wealthy heir at all. In fact, she had no real wealth to speak of. Her trust fund was a complete fabrication, and her lavish lifestyle was being funded by a growing web of lies. Anna had been convincing banks, hotels, and wealthy individuals to loan her money or cover her expenses, promising repayment with the assurance of future riches. She had a remarkable ability to make everyone around her believe in her story. The first crack in Anna's perfect world came when she failed to pay her bills. Luxury hotels, including the five-star 11 Howard, began demanding payment, but Anna offered nothing but excuses. She claimed that her trust fund was tied up in Europe, that wire transfers had been delayed. As the debts piled up, Anna's lies became more elaborate. She convinced a private jet company to fly her around the world, again promising payment that never came. But it wasn't just the hotels and businesses that were left waiting for payment. Anna managed to convince a wealthy hedge fund manager to give her $100,000 to help fund her grand art foundation project. She promised to repay him soon, only to come up with increasingly elaborate excuses as time went on. Anna kept up the charade with incredible skill. Her confidence in her lies was almost unshakable. She even convinced some of her friends to loan her thousands of dollars, telling them she was waiting for a wire transfer that never came. Eventually, the truth began to catch up with her. In 2018, after a series of missed payments, a journalist at the New York Times began to investigate Anna's story. What they uncovered was a tangled web of deceit. Anna's lavish lifestyle had been nothing more than smoke and mirrors, an elaborate con meant to keep her surrounded by the rich and powerful, while she siphoned money from anyone who believed in her fabricated narrative. In October 2018, Anna was arrested in a dramatic takedown. The press had caught wind of the fraud, and soon her carefully constructed world began to crumble. She was charged with multiple counts of grand larceny, theft of services, and attempted theft. The trial was a media sensation, with Anna becoming a symbol of how easily the wealthy elite could be deceived by someone with enough charisma and determination. The courtroom drama that followed was just as dramatic as Anna's rise to prominence. Throughout the trial, Anna maintained her innocence, claiming that she was simply misunderstood. She portrayed herself as a victim of a society that didn't understand her vision, deflecting any responsibility for the millions of dollars she had scammed from people who trusted her. Her defense argued that Anna had not committed fraud, but had simply failed to deliver on her ambitious promises. However, the evidence was overwhelming. Her high-flying lifestyle was funded entirely by lies. In 2019, Anna was convicted on multiple counts, and her life sentence was a stark contrast to the fame and luxury she had once enjoyed. As the fraud unfolded, it became clear that Anna Sorokin had been nothing more than a con artist. Her true identity was one of a desperate young woman who, in her obsession with wealth and status, had lost sight of everything else. The world would forever remember Anna Delvey as the fake heiress, a symbol of the power of appearance, and how easily people could be swindled by charm alone. Let's talk about Charles Ponzi, the man who inspired a global fraud. It was a time of dreams and ambition, a world on the brink of a new era. But amid the excitement of the early 20th century, one man would change the game forever. Charles Ponzi's name would become synonymous with fraud, as he orchestrated one of the most infamous scams in history. This is the story of a man who promised riches to the world and delivered nothing but disaster. The year was 1919, and the world was recovering from the ravages of World War I. In Boston, Massachusetts, a man named Charles Ponzi arrived with a vision. Born in Italy, Ponzi had a series of failed ventures behind him, and yet he believed he had found the key to wealth and success. He was about to unleash one of the most devastating scams the world had ever known, one that would change the financial landscape forever. Ponzi's plan was deceptively simple. He discovered that he could take advantage of the difference in exchange rates between countries. At the time, international postage stamps could be bought in one country at a lower price and sold in another at a higher price, creating a profit. Ponzi saw the opportunity to make millions by capitalizing on this discrepancy and promised investors enormous returns on their money. He told them he had developed a foolproof plan, one that would deliver a 50% return on investment in just 45 days, an offer that seemed too good to pass up. Investors, eager to get in on the deal, flocked to Ponzi, handing over their savings with the expectation of quick riches. Ponzi's charm and confidence won them over. He promised that their money would be used to buy international postal coupons and that the profits would be delivered back to them in no time. What they didn't know was that Ponzi wasn't investing in anything at all. Instead, Ponzi was using the money from new investors to pay returns to earlier investors. He was running a classic Ponzi scheme, taking money from those who came later to give the illusion of returns to those who had invested earlier. As long as he kept bringing in new money, the scheme could continue to grow. The key to his success was his ability to keep the cycle moving, to keep the promise of large returns coming, and to convince more and more people to invest. At first, everything seemed to go according to plan. Investors were thrilled with their returns, and Ponzi's reputation grew. He became a fixture of Boston society, attending social events, dining with the city's elite, and basking in the adoration of those who saw him as a financial genius. But as Ponzi's operation grew, so did the pressure to keep the scheme alive. He needed more and more money to keep the promises he had made, and the web of lies he had spun was becoming harder to maintain. In 1920, cracks began to appear. Journalists started investigating Ponzi's operation, and they began to notice the inconsistencies in his story. They couldn't find any real evidence that Ponzi was actually investing in anything. His returns seemed too good to be true, and they were. Ponzi was simply paying off earlier investors with the money from new ones. Ponzi's scheme came crashing down when the Boston Post newspaper published an exposé revealing the truth behind his operation. The public outcry was immediate. People who had invested their life savings in Ponzi's promises of wealth were left devastated. The collapse of the Ponzi scheme triggered a wave of panic, and soon, Ponzi was arrested for fraud. He was convicted of multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to prison. At the time of his arrest, Ponzi had defrauded investors out of an estimated $20 million, a staggering sum in 1920, equivalent to hundreds of millions today. The Ponzi scheme became a household term, forever associating Charles Ponzi's name with one of the greatest financial scams in history. Ponzi's story is a tale of greed, ambition, and the lengths to which people will go to achieve their dreams. His scheme, though far-reaching, was ultimately a house of cards, built on lies, deception, and a single fraudulent promise. Ponzi died in obscurity in 1949, but his legacy lives on, a cautionary tale for anyone who believes that quick riches come without a price.